We love music. You are locked into Six Towns Radio.
It is Six Towns Radio. Let's bring on a guest to the show. I've got the famous writer, author, comedian, band manager. I think I've got it all in there. Simon Donald, how you doing? You all right?
Hi, Terry. You can include playwright and actor in there, although that's actually a different Simon Donald, but some people have included it in their introductions by proper research. Never trust Wikipedia.
No, never. But I know these things from following your career. So what does it actually say on your passport then?
It says that I was born in the United Kingdom.
And that's it?
I don't think they put occupations on passports anymore.
Do they not?
No, I think so. Otherwise, it would have said toilet humorist.
Yeah. Of course. You've had a great career. We'll talk a little bit about your work on Viz and your co-writing that in a bit, but let's talk about your stand-up comedy work. First of all, I want to talk about the Simon Donald School of Swearing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've always had a fascination with swearing. I discovered at about the age of 6 or 7 that it was language that sort of had power that other words didn't have, you know. I could sort of use this newfound power to make a room full of little boys all sort of laugh hysterically, or a room full of little girls scream hysterically, or make my granddad drag me up the stairs by an earlobe and try to force a bar of Cussons Imperial leather into my mouth. It was fascinating stuff. So when we were working on Viz, in, I guess it was the late 90s, sort of it was the early days of websites, and we launched a Viz website, which we didn't really have a great deal of control over. It was run from our publisher's office in London, and sort of a couple of guys in the office who thought this might be an interesting thing were running it. It was a sort of hobbyist thing almost, and we had a character in Viz at the time called Sweary Mary, and Sweary Mary's mission in life was to try to swear on the front cover of Viz. That was the idea. And so we decided that one of the nice things to do on the website would be launch Sweary Mary's swearing dictionary. So what we did was we just had a sort of an online dictionary with definitions of all the swear words that we could think of, which was quite a few because we'd sort of anally retentive people all our lives who keep a track of these kind of things. And so but what we discovered, we nobody was particularly au fait with the internet at that point, and we asked for contributions, and the contributions went online unedited, and so it was quite disastrous because some of them were truly awful and deeply offensive. I mean, somebody who's editing a swearing dictionary referring to something as being offensive, you might wonder what's going on there. But if I just sort of dip my toe in, the subject matters were sort of racism and homophobia. So we just thought, right, we can't do that. We've got to edit this thing properly ourselves. So we began editing what was becoming by this time a sort of a burgeoning collection of swear words. And writing proper definitions out for all of the swear words. And this became a publication called Roger's Profanosaurus, which a lot of people are familiar with. And then, a few years later, when I started my stand-up comedy career, I'd always been toying with the idea of doing a show about swearing. In fact, me and Alex Collier did a two-man show at Edinburgh in 2004, which was called Swearing is Both Big and Clever. And we had intended to do a show when we sent the title in about swearing, but it was that we actually just did a show about the history of Viz, really, an anecdotal show. So it's always been in the back of my mind to put an Edinburgh Fringe show and then tour it, put something together about the subject of swearing. So that was what I did, and I previewed it in the spring and summer of last year. Spent the Edinburgh August in Edinburgh at the Fringe, and then I've been touring it ever since. And I just finished in London at the Comedy Cafe Theatre last week, which was a delight, I have to say. So And I've got to say, the day that I stopped doing the show, I thought, this show is really starting to get very good. so now I've got my new show to work on. But I'm quite sure that I think I'll revisit that show in years to come. Possibly, do a sort of second show on the same subject, perhaps, or just revisit the original show with more stuff,
Yeah, well, it's always interested me. Obviously, on the radio, we can't swear. I think there's 7 swear words that you can't use on the air, I think, called George Carlin. I can't remember. Something like that.
Oh, yeah, that's the routine, isn't it? That's a famous stand-up routine, isn't it? The words that you can't use, yeah.
Yeah, but it's always interested me, and I use it to punctuate sentences, obviously not on air, and people have said to me in the past that swearing is a sign of limited vocabulary, but obviously it's not. It's an extended vocabulary because you've got more words to use.
Well, yeah, Ian Dury said, Ian Dury, if you're not familiar with him, the younger listeners, was a punk poet and lyricist and singer in the music industry. And, he's very big in the sort of late 70s post-punk era. And he said of swearing, because he did a few songs that had swearing in the lyrics, and at the time that was sort of, it was quite shocking. And he defended himself by saying that anybody who switches their mind off to swearing, they're switching their mind off to a huge part of the English language. And I think that's exactly right. And I think we proved by our work on the Profanosaurus that it's one of the most fertile parts of the language. It's the most creative because it has to continually remain creative in order to be what it is, which is subversive. It's subversive language, so it's always reacting against what else is going on. And so really, I think it really is, in my experience, it's the most fertile part of the language, and it would be fertile because obviously it has its roots in filth.
Yeah, big fans of Ian Dury, of course. All listeners would definitely know who he was. It's always interested me on TV and in films when they don't use swearing, and in the 80s when they used to overdub swearing in films like Beverly Hills Cop. It just always interested me, the whole take.
Beverly Hills Cop was fantastic, wasn't it? That was surely the best example of why swearing is necessary in certain films, isn't it? Yeah. That entire joke was about a man's use of language. I mean, that was what was funny in that scene.
There was a Harry Enfield sketch about it, I think, in the 90s. Your stand-up has impressed some of your comedy heroes, hasn't it? Including Stuart Lee and Michael Palin. That must have been a real honour.
Well, yeah. I was it a couple of weeks ago, I gave a Danish filmmaker a lift to Barry Cryer's house, and she was making a film about Michael Palin's 70th birthday, and I said to myself when I was sitting having a cup of tea with Barry Cryer, he said, "Oh, this isn't putting you out, is it?" And I said, Barry, if somebody had said to the 10-year-old me that, listen, when you're 49, you're going to spend a day driving a filmmaker to Barry Cryer's house to make a film about Michael Palin in which you will be asked to speak, I wouldn't have believed it, you know what I mean? And my career has been, in terms of the opportunities that I've had to meet some of my heroes, and the stunning thing always being that they seem to know my work, which, and I mean, there's an amazing story which Michael Palin tells, actually, which is he said that he was at, when he was young and Python was just starting to become successful, he was in this room at a big glitzy Hollywood function of some description, and he said he was looking around himself and he was just surrounded by A-list names, and he was absolutely sort of felt like a school child, and he's looking around himself, sort of pretending that he's not breathtaking, and he looks across, and through the door comes Johnny Cash. And Michael Palin has grown up in the 50s listening to Johnny Cash, and Johnny Cash is one of his huge heroes. And Johnny Cash, he said, walks into the room, and he scans the room very quickly. And, he looks straight past Jack Nicholson and, all these, Frank Sinatra, Henry Mancini, all these people. And he just makes a beeline for Michael Palin and just says, "John Cash, love your work." It's incredible, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
I've had moments like that with some of my heroes, Terry Jones and Michael Palin, both big Viz fans. And Paul Weller too. Paul Weller is something which probably isn't known by a lot of music lovers. He's a huge fan of comedy. He's a bit of a comedy aficionado to an extent. He absolutely loves comedy. So these people talk to you about your work. Steve Coogan is a Viz anorak. He knows stuff about Viz that I can't remember. So yeah, that's been a particularly rewarding part of my career, that aspect of my boyhood heroes. Malcolm McDonald too, Superman.
Steve Coogan, of course, did the Viz Blaps with Simon Greenall and Sarah Millican. I had an interview with Simon Greenall about doing some of the voiceovers, and of course, he does the Meerkat voice, and he does Michael and Alan Partridge.
That's right. Michael and Alan Partridge, what a character that is like.
Again, just a massive comedy fan, and what you just said about meeting some of your heroes, it's happened to me through interviewing, and then I've met them again, they've remembered me. It's just like, why have you remembered me? It's just bizarre. And from a lad yourself, growing up in the northeast and making your friends laugh, to going on to what you've done, sometimes just sit back and think, wow.
I can't complain, put it that way.
No. So after Viz, you moved to London to venture further into stand-up comedy. Was that because there's more clubs down there and more of a comedy scene?
Yeah. I mean, and having grown up in Newcastle in fairly modest surroundings, arriving in London, I was quite taken aback by how different it is down here. Every building has wall-to-wall bell ends, but wall-to-wall media darlings. No, it was stand-up that I had in mind when I moved to London, but I also wanted to write my autobiography, and I had wanted to live in London since I was about 17, but my career had always kept me in Newcastle. So I saw this opportunity to sort of get away from the life that I knew for a few years and just sort of see if I could make a break in the stand-up world down here, and write my book, and that was what I did over the next. So that's what I've been doing over the 4 years. It took me a couple of years to write the book, and during that time I was doing comedy gigs here. But that coincided with my stand-up career really taking off in the northeast, which is obviously where I'd left. So I spend my time sort of between the two now. I do quite a lot of work in London now, but to be honest, I get more gig offers in Newcastle than I do down here. So, well, not in Newcastle, but in the north of England, shall we, and Scotland. So that's my life is split really between the north of England and London.
I can imagine though, because everyone knows who you are. Obviously, because of Viz, before your stand-up work, and now a bit of both. It must have been really hard at first, though, to step away from the whole Viz thing, which you co-created in the 70s, to do what you're doing now. It was something. To be honest, it might sound strange, but it was something that I've been meaning to do since about 1980. It was. I mean, literally, I began. Dipping my toes into comedy when I was about 12 or 13, and I started to write comedy sketches with a friend of mine from school called Gordon. And we used to perform them, and we were both huge Monty Python fans. And we started by sort of acting out Monty Python sketches and then writing our own, and performing them in drama classes at school, and then at the amateur theatre, the People's Theatre, which is where Kevin Whately and Ross Noble trained. Although Kevin was older than me and Ross is younger than me, so we didn't actually mix with them. But it's a theatre with a good reputation. Seymour Mace, who's another great northeast comic. I was meaning another one like Ross Noble, as opposed to another great northeast comic like myself.
that was what I started in performance, and then I got into music. I was doing sort of comedy character sketches and poetry in between bands. This is what it was quite popular, in the late 70s and early 80s. It was the comedy and music would appear on the same bill. So very different now. So I was sort of doing that when I was a kid, and that was what I wanted to do. And my brother and his school friend Jim sort of set about creating Viz and asked me if I would help them on the first issue. And that sort of went from there. And Viz obviously just became this massively successful thing, which obviously I hugely enjoyed doing. But constantly I was thinking, shouldn't I be going back to the thing that I wanted to do in the first place, which was the performance, So eventually I decided that it was time. I'd been on Viz for sort of 24 years, and the guys who were working with me at the time they'd been on Viz since 84, thereabouts, 84, 85. And I just, obviously it was not a problem to leave it in their capable hands. They'd been on it, 6 years less than me and Chris had, but they'd been on it for a good number of years. And now, since I've left, obviously they've actually worked on Viz for longer than I did. So, so my brother lasted about 20 years, and I lasted 4 years longer. But I was 4 years younger than him, so I actually gave up. It's only just occurred to me that now. Actually, I gave up working on Viz at the same age that he did. So we call it a midlife crisis, if you will.
Maybe that's what it was. The shackles were taken off, and you got a chance to do what you wanted to do again. But for me, it was really important when Viz came out. I can remember it came out every couple of months, and we used to get the new edition, take it home, and you'd read it cover to cover. You mentioned Steve Coogan. The reason probably he is an anorak is because he used to sit there reading it, and I used to talk to my mates, and I was from a council estate in Stoke, and I talked to him in a Geordie accent, not even knowing some of the things I was saying.
There's a lot of stories that I hear now from people who sort of their fond memories of discovering Viz when they were in record shops, and when they were sort of students or older school kids. And there's a lot of stories that you hear about people from Newcastle being asked to translate some of the stuff in Viz, sort of hordes of people gathering around to listen to somebody actually pronounce the words and explain what they meant in some of the stuff.
I can remember there was an episode of Sid the Sexist where he was in the kebab house, and his mate was checking if he could smell perfume on him. And he was saying, Wallace is like Sherlock Holmes. And
that was based on a true story, that one. That was a man actually took the meat out of that incident. Somebody said, he said to the guy next to him in the kebab shop, "Can you smell perfume on me neck?" And the guy says, "Aye." So he literally took the meat out of his kebab with the garlic sauce and that, and rubbed it all over his neck. And said, "Can you smell out now?" And said, "No." He says, "Oh, good." He said, "Oh, Wallace is like Sherlock Holmes, man. He'd been necking on, for some lad."
But I bet a lot of the chat-up lines that Sid came up with were from experience, because we've all got a friend like Sid. And I know yours was based on somebody who you knew, wasn't it, Graham?
Yes, our friend Graham Lyons was a mature student, and he funded his studies by working at the Biker Bun Depot. I was going to say Biker Bus Depot, which would have been wrong anyway, but it became Bun. Well, that's another story. The Bun story is about the bottom inspector. But he funded his edit here. He funded his studies by working at the Biker Reclamation Plant, which is basically the bin depot. And so he was a bin man, but he just worked on the phones at the bin depot. And so although he was an intellectual fella, he hung around with a lot of proper working class Geordies. So he had this working class Geordie sense of humour. And but at the same time, he was incredibly shy. He had this real sort of studious, mousy nature to him. And he was so shy that he couldn't bring himself to ask a girl out. So he came round to see I mean, he was about 27 or something at this time. He came out to see me and my brother, who were in our late teens. And I mean, why he thought we would be able to help him ask the girl out, I've got no idea. But he wanted advice on how to ask this girl called Sandy out. And he couldn't face knocking on her door, and he couldn't face ringing her on the telephone. And he produced from his pocket a piece of paper, on a sort of small square of paper, about 3 or 4 inches square, on which he'd written in mirror writing, "Dear Sandy, I would like to take you to the pictures. Please give me a ring if you'd like to come," sort of thing. It was all very teenage, you know. And he started asking us if we thought this would impress her, you know, the fact that he'd written backwards, right? And we were saying, well, you know, if that's all you can face doing, just do it, you know, stop worrying about it. And worrying about it's a big problem more than anything, you know what I mean? And off he went, you know, this sort of mousy fellow. He sort of shuffled off down the path, and about halfway down the path, he pulled this little scrap of paper out of his pocket again, and he turned and waved it in our direction. And he said, "This piece of paper's gonna pull me some totty tonight." And Sid the Sexist was born really at that point. You know, just the idea that this man who is completely shy around women just feels when he's out and about or with his friends, he feels he's got to put on this big macho front, you know. And it was, you know, it was obvious that there was a character to be made out of that, and it just wrote itself out. I mean, that was the joy of Sid the Sexist, was once, you know, I'd had that initial thought, it just wrote itself.
Yeah, I loved his mates as well, Barry and all them.
Yes, Baz and Bob and Joe. Joe is based on a friend of mine called Big Pete. Big Pete doesn't know that, unless he listens to this radio show. Never told Big Pete. Big Pete is a giant. But he's not really based, his character isn't based. Actually, his character is slightly like Big Pete insofar as he's a huge man and everybody assumes he's really stupid. And then when he chooses to open his mouth, he's often got like a little gem to say, you know.
Like a lot of kids my age, I grew up and I lived with my mum. My dad had left years previous, so my gran raised me quite a lot while my mum was at work, and my gran didn't like swearing at all. She used to tut at the telly if they said anything at all that was slightly in the arena of swearing. But in her twilight years, she passed away in the late 90s, she used to take Viz to bed with her and read it, and always wondered what she thought of it. But I'd like to think there's some comfort and some humour in there before she passed away.
Right. Well, in School of Swearing, because I'm not doing it anymore, I'll tell you this story. But used to tell this story at the end, and it's a completely true story about my dad. My dad had a stroke when he was in his 80s, a couple of years before he died. And after he had his stroke, the disability that he was left with was that he couldn't speak, which was really difficult for him because he was a historian and communication was a big part of his life, you know. But he discovered a number of things when he was living in the care home, which were absolutely fascinating, sort of neurologically speaking. Because firstly, a bit like, do you remember the boy singer was in the X Factor, Gareth Gates? Yeah, he stammered like that, but he could sing beautifully, right? He couldn't speak, but he could sing beautifully. Well, my dad discovered that he could sing despite being unable to speak. He could sing because it's triggered by a different part of your brain. So he could sing along, he'd sing all the words into the radio, but couldn't put a sentence together. Now, he also discovered that he could still dance, because the movement of dance, he was quite unsteady on his feet, but the movement of dance, once again, is triggered slightly differently. So he could make smooth movements, but trying to walk, he couldn't make smooth movements. It was really weird. And then my brother went to give my dad a surprise. He fetched my dad's long-lost sisters, and my dad had very little contact with her over the past sort of 30 years. And he brought them to the door of my dad's room, and my dad saw them come through the door, and he staggered towards them, tears coming down his face. And then he opened his mouth, and the words that came out of his mouth are unrepeatable on a family radio show, ladies and gentlemen. But what he discovered in that moment was that he could swear freely. He could swear at will because, once again, it's triggered by a different part of your brain. So that's something which, if I do give a rebirth to the show, your listeners will be able to hear all about.
Ah, amazing. Well, it's obvious when you think about it, the brain is a complex thing.
Yeah, and it stores things in different ways, you know. So obviously when you learn a swear word, your brain has a storage system and it thinks, whoa, you know, it's a bit like the prison system, and it's thinking, right, I'm going to keep the paedophiles on a separate wing, because they're too dangerous, you see.
My gran, I used to think that she used to read like Chat and Take a Break and the top tips in there. Maybe she thought they were similar. I'd like to think she didn't try any of them.
I wonder with Viz, you know, I think that there must have been an element of it. It was like it was the elephant in the room. Do you know what I mean? It's like everybody sort of had this humour, but they didn't admit it to one another. And everybody thought when Viz first came out, they thought it was just for them, and then they realised it was for everybody. You know, everybody has, you know, these you know, everybody thinks that farting is funny, just nobody admits it. You know, it's although they didn't used to admit it anyway, you know, and you know, we sort of I think we just kicked the door in without sort of, you know, having a conscious thought beforehand of what we were doing. You know, it was just that we put schoolboy humour on paper, and it had never been put on paper before.
I just think, like I said earlier, it was important for me and for so many other people to, you know, break through that barrier. And you look at what's on TV now, the sort of thing that's on Celebrity Juice and programmes like that would never have made the TV in the 80s or 90s, and now it's just the norm.
Ironically, as well, have you seen what Ben Elton's come out with now? If you look on the internet, he's done the worst sitcom I think I've ever seen. There's clips of it on the internet now. I mean, and he's just sort of completely lost. You know, those sort of groundbreaking people. Some of them seem to have completely lost it. It must be the company they keep or something. I don't know what it is, but no, I think you're right. I think that. I mean, I talked about that a lot in School of Swearing, you know, the fact that the world has changed a lot in my lifetime. There was, you know, there was a moment, I think, you remember when John Lydon accidentally uttered the last two taboo words on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. I think that changed a lot of things, you know, 'cause I think everybody sort of went, well, actually, what's all the fuss about? Whereas, you know, sort of 20 years earlier, you know, there would have been questions in Parliament, and I think everyone just went, actually, this isn't such a big deal, you know.
Amazing to talk about, and I've really enjoyed our chat.
Which I could say the same, mate.
You've got a website, of course, where people can find you.
Yeah, simondonald.com. It's currently being rebuilt, actually, but there are links on it. I mean, it's not completely dead. It's a page which is just links to Facebook and Twitter and signing up to my mailing list and so on, and contact if people want to book gigs and so on. So yeah, there's a website there, simondonald.com, and as I've mentioned already, I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and people can follow me and sign up to get regular updates about gigs and things like that.
Thank you very much, Simon Donald.
Brilliant. Thank you.